FutureSense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nyck Jeanes and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, FutureSense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is FutureSense. And that's where we're tuned to Bay FM 999. Thanks to all of our sponsors, and thanks to those also who came to the Bay FM Christmas Disco on Saturday night. It was great fun. We were there for a fair while, but left a bit early. I didn't feel like the big rage, but certainly had a great time early on. And thanks to all the DJs, all the work from all the Bay FM people, volunteers who worked on the door, and the DJs who did such a great job. And thanks for all coming and helping Bay FM keep on the road, because it's quite a big fundraiser, these Christmas parties and the middle of the year party, which will also be the next one sometime in the middle of next year. You're tuned now to FutureSense with Nyck and Steve. Steve, you've been away up the coast in an interesting experience up near Gympie, of all places.
Up that way, I've been dancing in the forest.
You've been dancing in the forest. Well done. It's lovely to see you. Lovely to see you moving your limbs like that.
It's good to. It's been a while, actually. It was just such a lovely breakaway.
Yeah.
Get out there and barefoot in the dirt. And
so you passed through Gympie, which is a fairly conservative part of Australia, and then ended up in the woods, in the forest.
Yes, it was an interesting little values comparison. I stopped in Gympie, went into the shopping mall there, and there was a big advertising lit up billboard thing for one of the local Christian churches.
Yes, God bless them.
Talking about a good values-based education for the local children, and it's quite interesting. There's definitely a Bible belt through that part of Queensland there, particularly around sort of Gympie through, and maybe even further south and up through Hervey Bay. Lots of churchy organisations. Churchy
organisations, protected as they are as much as possible by our current government, Scott Morrison and the like. They like to protect their own, one could say. My opinion.
Yeah. It's as we've said
nothing wrong with
before,
church, by the way, folks. If that's what gets your rocks off, if that's where you find value.
Kind of organisations that have come out of the fourth layer of human development.
And hanging on tight to those interpretations of life, the universe, and everything. It's a very stable thing for many people, isn't it? The notion of the church.
It sort of correlates with the agricultural lifestyle of long-term outlook. Things don't change much in the short term.
Yeah.
Be good for your whole life, and maybe you'll go to heaven when it's finished, kind of thing.
Bit of serfdom is good for you, and of course we're seeing many movements in the religious sphere these days. Some of which we can't really talk about.
Some of which can't be mentioned at all.
We can't mention it at all.
Herald Sun didn't mention something on their front page.
No, they didn't mention something at all. Nothing at all happened there.
A big black thing that said censored. We can't mention this, but
that's right.
We'd like to.
Can't talk about it. We'd love to.
Yeah.
If you do want to find out about that, you can go to some overseas outlets. You might find out what we're talking about. You probably know already if you're an educated person, which you are. But along those same lines, of course, the Australian government has just announced that West Jerusalem be the capital of Israel, rather than moving the embassy, which was just a little bit too far, I think, for the Morrison government. They have nevertheless tipped their hat to something.
Well, I think it's quite a smart move by Scott Morrison. He's managed to offend everybody. Whereas, he could have gone one way or the other way and just offended one side, but he's offended everyone because he hasn't fully supported the Jerusalem thing from Israel and the US's point of view, and he's offended everyone by having a bet each way, which is the kind of thing that Scott Morrison would do, have a bet each way.
Yes, that's right.
I think.
Put on his cap, pick up a beer and have a bet each way, no problems, and pray on the weekend. No offence, Scott, you're doing your job, or supposedly.
Doing the best he can.
Doing the best he can. And that's the point, isn't it? That when there is a values gap, when there's values differences between different people in different sort of stages of evolution, pretty hard you can't tell them what's right or wrong because they have their own version. That's that, really.
It's easy to be cynical and just say that they're bad people, but you really need to recognise that this is where they're at, that this is their underlying framework for making sense of the world and surviving in the world is to behave in a particular way. It's kind of like a computer program, really. It's an operating system that gets installed at a particular point, and we run according to it, and until it doesn't work. And then when it doesn't work, we usually keep running according to it just to see if it might start working again. But inevitably, we have to go through some change and install a new system and upgrade.
Well, of course, you as just coming back to being up in Gympie and going into the forest of dance, of course, it's a completely different set of values going on there, I guess. Compared to...
absolutely. It was quite a contrast to arrive in the forest, and I was blessed to be invited up to what was kind of really a private electronic music event, I guess, in the forest up there. An arrangement put together by a bunch of people from the sunny coast, and it's been running for a couple of years now. But it's limited to sort of friends and friends of friends, so it's kind of like a big private party. About 150 people, and it was really, really nice. Virtually everybody knew each other. They were a wonderful, evolved group of people, very respectful. Looked after the landscape, and a great setting with wonderful swimming holes. And
So when you say evolved people, what do you mean by that?
I just mean in adherence with the new paradigm.
Adherence with the new paradigm. Is it adherence with or to the new paradigm?
Yes,
split hairs here.
In sync with the new paradigm would probably be better. But just a bunch of lovely, open, transparent, loving people who care for the world and the planet and each other, and enjoy some good electronic music and like to dance barefoot in the dirt.
And you also did give a little bit of a talk up there.
I did.
Because it wasn't just a party, it was also, a bit more than that.
It was, I gave a breakfast talk on Sunday morning, which I was a bit concerned that no one would turn up, or those that would turn up had been up all night. But actually, I was surprised. I had a good turnout at 8 a.m. and lots of people very interested.
The mushroom omelettes, perhaps.
Could have been. I didn't see any omelettes, but who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. So anything else you can tell us about up there? Because, of course, it's such a great thing to imagine these kind of small events, but nevertheless sort of lodged in this, quite as you said, sort of Bible Belt of Queensland, this, just up the road in the Gympie supermarket, a completely different reality in operation.
Well, I must say they weren't Gympie locals. They'd driven a little way to get there.
Yeah.
But, sunny coast crowd. But interesting juxtaposition to go from the Gympie shopping mall and into the forest to an electronic dance event.
And it really is how we live, I guess, on the world now. These different value systems lodged in either large groups of people in society, those that still sort of theoretically control things, and then these other fringe emergences, expressions of new paradigms and new ways of seeing and thinking, sort of sitting side by side and trying to find a place to be with each other and to influence each other, I guess. I mean, is that the case? I don't know.
Well, it really is a case of people living in different worlds and having a different fundamental framework for making sense of how the world works, how reality works. In the case of the kind of agricultural the agricultural revolution mindset, which emerged about 10 or 12,000 years ago, and which is still quite strong in many, many parts of the world, including around Gympie there. It's a long-term outlook on life. It's a communal way of living as opposed to an individual way of living, as in the modern scientific industrial way. The mindset is kind of like you follow the rules of life. And often those rules of life do come from a religion, with the Ten Commandments, for example. And this emerged at a time when humanity first learnt how to crop on a large scale, so it allowed us to gather together in big groups, and you can't live sort of wild and loose. Once you start to build a town or a city, you've got to have some rules to make sure that, everybody drives on one side of the road and not both sides of the road, for example.
Except at the bachelor and spinsters balls out in the bush, there they can do.
Well, that's a kind of a little regressive thing, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let some steam off.
And it's important to remember that these value systems are nested inside each other. So where you've got a prevalence of this sort of agricultural mindset, the authoritarian mindset, it's not the only value system that's present. You've also got nested inside that. You've got the sort of, as you just alluded to, the sort of teenage wild and loose third layer, and then the tribal second layer underneath it, and so it's a composite.
Must be very interesting now, given this agricultural / religious base, arguably, and of course there's more to that. That's being somewhat simplistic, but given the nature of agricultural endeavour in Australia now. I mean, we've been a very successful agricultural country and still are to a degree in certain areas, but much of that agricultural base is collapsing. Along with that, rural towns, rural families, lots of, unfortunately, a high degree of suicides in those communities in small towns, small farming towns in Australia.
Yeah, because it's such a rigid mindset compared to the modern mindset, even the scientific industrial mindset is much more flexible because it looks for options, and it doesn't tie itself down to one way of living. But the fourth layer, the previous layer, the authoritarian or agricultural era mindset, has this rigid rule set to follow. And we're seeing more of this in the public eye at the moment because of the regressive search that's going on, because we're in transition between two sets of values. It's natural for us to look backwards and say, okay, things aren't working so well at the moment. Maybe if we remember how we used to live years ago and we go back to those values, everything will be fine.
Keep the family farm, encourage your kids to stay with the farm, and
exactly,
they're not, and that puts a lot of stress on people, of course.
And we hear this from politicians all the time, back to basic values, back to family values. Let's make whatever country great again. It's a common thing, particularly during times of change, and so we're seeing a regression back to these older value sets at the moment in search for something that works better than what we have, because there's a general recognition that the way things are running at the moment, it doesn't work so well. Our systems are failing to cope, largely because of the complexity of a connected world, a highly interconnected world.
And I imagine it must be very difficult for some people on at that stage of growth and still in that agricultural mindset. Farming families in Australia, a good example that we're talking about, have been there for generations in many cases. They're seeing their kids leave, often not staying with the farm, so there's that pressure there. But also the perceived lack of support by institutions and governments as has been provided in the past.
Yeah.
Mainly for purely financial reasons, because it's not a very good investment anymore.
No, it's complex as always. Life is complex, but the communally oriented ways of living, so traditional tribal, and then the agricultural, and then the emerging paradigm, the network centric humanistic paradigm, all communal ways of living. And they tend to have longer outlooks in terms of their consideration of time. They think in longer time frames. I mean, you look at the Indigenous people, and they have stories going back tens of thousands of years. Some of which have been validated by science. Geological events that have been told over and over again for tens of thousands of years. Stories. And then in the agricultural world, it's the same. It's a long-term outlook. You think in terms of seasons and years and that kind of thing. And to come from a family tradition where, going back generations, the family has worked this patch of land, and then all of a sudden the climate's changing or the economic situation is changing and it's not as viable as it used to be, and you're faced with making a radical change, and it's a big step to break that long chain of activity within a family lineage. And very stressful for people who are faced with having to do that. But there are lots of factors, of course, not just the fact that the climate is changing, but also economic factors. The sort of domination of the supermarket world by a couple of big companies, who put pressure to get the prices down and screw the farmers, really, trying to get their supplies cheaper and cheaper.
And you can really, I guess what I'm alluding to here, exactly what you're saying, is for people who are very lodged in that particular frame, very difficult to understand these changes coming down the line. Very hard, I imagine, to make sense of them. And
absolutely,
even more pressure applied to them when they come to. We've always been supported this way. We're the primary industry in the country, and
that's
so on.
That's right,
so.
And very challenging to their sense of self. If you're a child who's inherited the farm. And you know that your father worked it successfully, and your grandfather and his father worked it successfully, and all of a sudden you look like you can't, then you really start to question yourself and say, what's wrong with me? That people have been able to make this work for a long time, and now it doesn't look like it's going to work for me. So, lots of pressure, and I guess this is why we see suicide and those sorts of things. Yeah.
And I guess a change in agriculture, because there is significant change in agricultural practices in some pockets in Australia. There's a lot of advancement in terms of reconstituting the way that we care for and have a guardianship over the land, and how we use land, how we make it our friend, so to speak, including some ancient indigenous agricultural practices which have been rediscovered in books like Dark Emu and others recently. So some of those practices coming into play, but to let go of the old practices again, same thing, and to adopt new practices, which on the face of it for some of these people I imagine are a bit weird, a bit too alternative, a bit too progressive, something, where's this idea of defeating the landscape and defeating the weather and defeating, this sort of, that Australia was kind of arguably built on in its agricultural
you
endeavours.
just reminded me too. I connected with some folks from the permaculture movement up at this music event that I went to on the weekend, who were connected with the Grounded Festival. And I've had a little bit to do with the permaculture movement. In fact, years ago, I had a little plot of land outside Mackay when I was working up there. And my wife and I started a permaculture garden, which we did for a while. Which was very cool. And
swales, you had swales, did you?
I'm not sure about the swales, but maybe it was out of season. I don't know.
Maybe a little bit too far off the coast for the swales.
Yeah. I didn't hear anything anyway. Interesting to connect with those guys. And from what I know, I don't know a lot about the permaculture movement, but it's quite an extraordinary movement, because it's not just about planting plants. Of course, it's a whole social model that extends far beyond the farming thing. And I think there's a lot of useful information there for the future.
Very good. You're tuned to FutureSense with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up. You're tuned to BayFM FutureSense with Steve McDonald, Nyck Jeanes here, through to 11 o'clock this morning. Now, this is the first time we've been talking about you being up in Gympie, and we've been talking about the value gaps of some of the...
Well, it wasn't actually Gympie, it was outside Gympie, but I passed through Gympie.
Yes, nothing wrong with Gympie, good place. There's a good cafe there, actually, somewhere. I can't remember. I went to once upon a time. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore. But first time you've come into town this morning. And through the roundabout.
I know, I was surprised by a giant new erection.
Oh, excuse me.
Somebody has erected a piece of art.
Yes, I know. It's caused an absolute social media furor. It's amazing, really.
Yes. I used to live in Melbourne years ago, and it reminded me of Jeff Kennett.
Sorry about that.
Jeff Kennett was famous for erecting a few pieces of art around Melbourne, and one of them is this giant yellow bar which hangs over the freeway as you drive into the city there. If you've been to Melbourne, I'm sure you've seen it. But it did become...
If you had only seen Steve's fist out there, clenched in his arm outright,
simulating the bar
of the...
and it became known locally, of course, as Jeff's erection.
Yeah, Jeff's erection.
Yes.
The Kennett erection.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it also looks a bit like a rocket made of tinsel, as you said earlier today.
It could be a rocket made of tinsel.
Yeah, it has birds, but apparently, look, I mean, my initial reaction was like everybody else's, like, oh my God, but it's interesting how we sort of jump to the phallic interpretation. I'm not saying that's wrong, because it's clearly...
What phallic interpretation? I don't know what you're talking about.
You said that there was a giant erection.
Well, it was. Someone erected it.
I built it, yeah, exactly. But I think that there's a bit of pause that's required because apparently it's not finished yet, and it is all made of these steel birds. And if you look at it closely as you drive past, the steel birds are it's kind of a nice idea. I kind of like that idea. It's just unfortunate that it's sort of emanating from this supposedly this lighthouse structure that's coming out. So perhaps we should wait just a little bit until it's complete.
That's true. It's not finished yet. We should give them the benefit of the doubt and see what it looks like when it's done.
But I think, the council, because there is a public art panel that's responsible for deciding on this $52,000 piece of art, and I guess those couple of councillors and the others on that public art panel, whoever they are probably going to be going, oh my goodness, because I must say that you would have to ask the question, and I'm not overly criticising because I don't know yet for myself, but you'd have to ask the question, who made that decision and how you didn't see what this might have looked like.
I mean, art's such a difficult thing, though, isn't it? Because the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as they say.
I know nothing about art, but I know what I like, as they say, and I basically agree with that.
Yeah,
I know. You can text in, by the way, folks. You probably know that already. We've had a couple of texts today about a couple of other things, but 04373 4119 0373 41119 and make any comments at all, and all the stuff about the erect art piece out there. We probably heard it all, even though we're continuing on that vein a little bit. But let's just take a moment to see, and I do have a feeling for the artist, because no doubt the artist had a vision and a genuine artistic vision of some sort, and it's been agreed to, it's been paid for, and here we are. So we're going to have to somehow make the best of it, I guess. It's not going to suddenly change overnight, or some people are saying just get rid of it. That's not going to happen. Let's talk about some more serious things, however, in terms of what's going on in the world generally speaking. We've been talking a little bit today about the values gap in the world and its various manifestations.
Yes, as we progress into this paradigm shift, which is already underway at a global scale, we're going to become aware of this contrasting value set between the emerging paradigm and the existing dominant paradigm, the modern scientific industrial era that we've grown up under.
Yeah.
What we are noticing now is that many of the systems and concepts that have come out of that modern scientific industrial way of thinking aren't working so well anymore. And simple things like the decision-making process, which superseded the old sort of agricultural authoritarian decision-making process, which was really to check the rules of life, whatever rules that you live by, someone else's rules, not yours, they were given to you by a higher authority, and see if the challenge that you're faced with can be resolved by sticking to those rules somehow. And then, of course, the modern scientific industrial era broke us out of that because it got too complex to follow a rigid rule set. So we had to find a new way, and the new way that we found with the scientific and industrial revolutions was to look at options and figure out which one of those options was going to fit our particular circumstances best, and then choose the best option and make a plan and proceed that way. But now, of course, we've got too many options. We've got access to so much information that you just can't process all the options anymore. You Google something on Google and you get millions of results. I mean, how do you figure out which is the best result there? So we have to move to some other way, and the emerging paradigm is guiding us to move to a form of consultation within our network. So we're moving to a very network-centric way of living, and in fact, it's already here in many places of the world. It's just not the dominant global paradigm yet. But we reach out to our peer group within our network and we say, "What do you think about this? What do you think about this erection? Does it look good?" Those sorts of things. If you're talking about art, of course. And that's how we come up with, what's best for us and our extended network. And of course, the systems that we have in place at the moment, socially, like our political systems, our economic systems, etc., were pretty much all designed under the previous paradigm. And so they're designed for a world that existed before the internet was even invented. Before we got flooded with all this information, and before we had such challenges trying to figure out what is best, what is the most appropriate way for us to live in such a complex world where we're overloaded with information. And the next step forward for most Western societies is to start looking at this value of operating within a connected network and drawing in opinions, perspectives from all the different angles that can be found within our extended peer network.
I'm thinking, as you're speaking of, we've talked a bit about this off air, of our education systems, one of those systems that, of course, was created and built and sustained in the previous paradigm.
Even, the education system even extends back further,
yes,
to the authoritarian agricultural paradigm, because so much of our education system has been shaped by the churches, and the churches thinking according to that previous old paradigm, the rigid rule set paradigm.
Which is why we've still got the debate, of course, about religious freedom, which is yet to be resolved from the Morrison government, and how that's going to pan out in terms of our education system and the freedom to worship as you wish, and to have rules and regulations based on your religion, still having some impact, influence within the education system of some schools.
Yeah, and I think this is why we're seeing the education system appearing to be under such pressure at this time, because it's actually not even an entirely modern paradigm. It's a previous sort of agricultural authoritarian paradigm that's had a whole lot of modern stuff kind of tacked onto it.
So this is why it's interesting. It was two things we heard in the news before, and you'd be aware that in New South Wales, the Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, has announced that from the beginning of school year next year, mobile phones will be banned in primary school classrooms, not in upper school, not in high school classrooms, but in primary school classrooms, which on the face of it to me sounds like a pretty good idea, because clearly it's a distraction. But it's like the horse has already bolted, surely, because as you said, the education system is designed from the past. We've got kids in there who have grown up with a mobile phone in their pocket, maybe from the age of 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever years. They're used to this engagement with
the entire world.
With the entire world. And so I don't know how that's going to pan out in terms of
it's as you say, there's some advantage to removing a distraction from the classroom.
Yeah.
But you're asking a kid who's grown up with a device, who has access to the entire world and all the knowledge of humanity that's ever been documented is right there on the device, and you're asking them to put that away and pay attention to a much narrower source of hopefully entertainment, in the classroom.
Tricky.
And it's challenging, and I hope that I can understand the logic of taking away the distraction, but I hope that it's not an anti-device attitude altogether that's going to remove screen access entirely from the classroom, because we live in a world of screens.
Well, in the same token, and not with the same announcement, but Federal Education Minister Dan Tehan has flagged a revamp of the national curriculum, saying we need to get back to basics like reading, writing and maths before worrying about soft skills like teamwork and critical thinking.
I've been getting this image of that old painting of the farmer with the pitchfork and his wife who look like the Amish folks. I keep getting that in my head. It's like getting back to the hand implements and shun all new technology.
Luddites would again train some Luddites, some neo-Luddites to the fore. But it's amazing, because how can you take a more simplified approach to an increasingly complicated or complex system that we're living in, which the children are growing up in?
This is the regressive search dynamic. So it's a normal human response to the challenge of change and being overwhelmed is to think back to a time when life was simpler, things worked okay, and go to living by those old values once again. And of course, the reason that we've evolved to do this, this is in our DNA. It's an instinct that we don't think about doing it; we just naturally do it. We've developed that way because it actually accelerates change. By going back to an older set of values, which are even simpler than the ones that we're living by, up until the time that we get challenged, we actually move back to a set of values which are even less capable of allowing us to cope with complexity, and so it creates increased evolutionary tension. It's like drawing back the elastic band on the slingshot. You're creating tension, and sooner or later that tension gets so much it has to release. And I'm thinking about artwork again now. And then you're
fixated. You
get thrust forward into the future, and so it has actually an evolutionary dynamic that has developed to accelerate change when we face challenge. The interesting thing about it, though, is that once you understand that dynamic, you're not sort of unconsciously buffeted around by it, but once you actually understand the dynamic and how it works, you can make conscious choices to actually bypass the tension. If you recognize that as soon as some tension appears, that it means something needs to change, and you understand the change process, then instead of looking backwards to, let's get back to old values and make America great again, you can actually think forward instead of backwards, and you can literally bypass the tension if you're on top of it and you understand what's going on. But most people don't. Yeah, and our government certainly doesn't at the moment.
Well, it's interesting with education, of course, because Australia was for a long time way up the top of the education of our young in regards to other countries in the world, but has slipped significantly back for over 2 decades, falling behind Japan, Canada and New Zealand and other comparable countries. So I wonder what's wrong there, what's not being met in this country with regards to education now.
I think it's much wider than education, because you can look at a lot of different disciplines and see Australia has fallen behind. The one that's most obvious to me because of my involvement with psychedelic research in Australia is just embracing these new medicines. We have such a conservative attitude here that after PRISM, our local research organisation, was created back in 2011, we knocked on doors for a full 8 years, trying to find an institution or a hospital that was prepared to be open-minded and look at the possibility that these things are actually amazingly capable medicines. And for 8 years, all we got was no, sorry, not today.
Well, what were they afraid of? Because as we know, we talk about this on the show, in America, which is pretty regressive in other ways, the research particularly into MDMA for PTSD under supervision, under proper therapeutic situations, is now at stage 3 with the Federal Drug Administration. The FDA would likely to come online and actually be legal for these uses within a couple of years now, and yet we are that far behind.
Yeah, so they're just
what's missing?
They're
what
just
are they afraid of?
Phase 3. Look, I think because America has such a large population, you get the full spectrum of values really anywhere. And the larger the population is, the more numbers you have in the smaller percentages of the population. And I guess I'm guessing, I don't really know, that perhaps because of that factor that there's a large population, America, it's a well-resourced country if you've got money, and so they've been able to get enough momentum there to do some world-leading change, which is wonderful. And we just haven't got the numbers here or the financial support. We haven't had it up until now anyway, to do the same. However, I must say that late last year, late 2017, there was a tipping point, and our research organisation PRISM suddenly found ourselves being offered funding where before it had been a very sort of dry argument, and also we had a couple of opportunities crop up with institutions that mean that we are quite likely to start our first psychedelic study here in Australia in 2019, which is quite exciting.
And Australia's had a great reputation in terms of R&D scientifically across the board, particularly in terms of medical research for a long time. We seem to still maintain that fairly well, but have slipped somewhat in the last decade or so. For sure.
There are isolated examples where we are world leaders in some senses. I think we invented Wi-Fi here in Australia. If I remember rightly.
We did invent Wi-Fi.
Things like that. So we do.
We can be blamed.
We do have an impact, but that conservative element of society has been quite strong over recent decades. And we were talking about the sort of authoritarian agricultural mindset and that particular value set. It's still quite prevalent, and also in the US. You go to the US and you'll see a lot of people flying national flags in their front yards and those sorts of things, which is all representative of that same layer 4 mindset. It also engages in nationalism. It's a very ethnocentric way of thinking. It's like people like me, people who identify with the same causes that I identify with, whether it be nationalism or religion or whatever. So, and it's still pretty strong here in Australia too. There's still a good chunk of society that lives life according to those values.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, how would you place what's happening in France with the yellow shirts? I mean, you nicely put it earlier off air. It's like the canary in the coal mine, the yellow canary in the coal mine.
Yes.
That's an interesting, because France seems to have this ability, the French, to, when they revolt, when the peasants are revolting, they seem to do it very well overall, and it seems to have a long-term actual change effect.
They do, they've got a history of it, haven't they?
They do.
And I do think it's a canary in the coal mine. I mean, it's a response to this evolutionary tension that has resulted from the regressive search back to old values, and we've seen a bit of right-wing influence in France there, and in a number of European countries, and that's increased the evolutionary tension. And sooner or later, the tension on that elastic band has to reach a tipping point. And what we've just seen in France is a little tipping point where there's been enough tension created that people have said, no, this is enough. And if they don't have avenues of available to them to address, through in a civilized kind of a way, then guess what? It becomes uncivilized, and people start to protest and burn speed cameras and those sorts of things, as they've been doing.
95% of speed cameras in central France region were destroyed as part of the Yellow Vest protest, in fact.
Yeah. So, this is the canary in the coal mine. It's an opportunity to see, okay, where is the tipping point here? How much tension can society tolerate? And hopefully what that then does when these little eruptions happen, hopefully government pays attention. And I think France is doing that. And I think Macron, who's come out and actually said, okay, we hear you, we're going to change this and this and this.
Well, he's trying to change some things. I don't think it's enough, of course. But what's interesting to me here is the underclass in countries like France seems to be much quicker to revolt in this way, to actually get aggressive out of frustration, than the underclass in most of our Western societies, which don't seem to have the same response. Not that I'm supporting any sort of violent action, but that's how frustrated people actually are now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and what we're looking at here is a complex system, a complex adaptive system, which is society and driven by human nature. And it's kind of like we're going through a phase transition is what's happening. shifting from one value set to the next value set, and you could liken it to boiling a pot of water on the stove, and eventually the water turns into gas, which is a phase transition. And you can pick up the early warning signs that things are changing, but when you start to see the first bubbles appearing in the bottom of the pot, and this is like that. It's like the first bubbles appearing, and this is about to boil over. And we've just seen an occasion in France where it has boiled over. And if we're aware of these change dynamics and how complex systems work, we can also look at our own society here in Australia and say, okay, these are the first bubbles, folks. We're starting to see bubbles here, and if we don't act on this and change something, then it's going to actually boil over. And let's hope that we don't see the same kind of boil over occur here in Australia. I mean, we do see it, on a small scale, like the social violence that we've seen in Melbourne over the last couple of years. These are all little tipping points, and we need to take note of them. And particularly governments and those who have the power to influence society need to take note and just understand that it means something has to change.
Beautiful. For all of you out there, strangers in a strange land, you're grokking FutureSense here on Bay FM. You are tuned to Bay FM to FutureSense here with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald through till 11 o'clock. It's 10:06. A few of your texts, a couple of texts on the silver bullet out there on the roundabout. I like this one. Totally non-organic totem for arts and industry / proposed massive suburban overdevelopment. At least cover it in Christmas lights and children's stuffed native animal toys like koalas, wallabies, and lots more to, quote, imagine. And thanks to John, a local sculptor and environmental artist in the celebration of life. And someone else has written a bit more hard to understand this. Relativism pretends that anybody or anything is as relevant as the next. This is logic devoid of meaning. Art is called art because it rings with truth, because it's beautiful, promotes a healthy perspective, inspires happiness, and emits light. Of course, many people would disagree with that. Art can be also an expression of the darkness, so I'm not sure if we agree with that, but you might. The steel pillar out there does not qualify to be called art. It is just another try-hard. Whoever approved it should lose their job. Please name the members of that committee that are forcing their bent aesthetics on everyone. I say we put it in their backyards. Strong words. I did mention the council, the forum called the Public Art Forum. There's a couple of council members on that. You can check out who they are. It's pretty clear. It's Councillor Enjo and Councillor Hackett, I do believe, but there will be other members on that panel as well. And so, the discussion goes on. And the other email too, thanks about EMF and Wi-Fi, saying that it is a major danger, particularly for younger people. And this writer claims that this is the reason why phones have been prohibited in schools in Europe. We're not sure about that exactly, but perhaps that's true. So thanks for your text. You can text in, as I said, 0437 11119. Here to Bay FM comes up on our screen. Let's move to something else. Amazing discoveries going on. A global team of scientists have found an ecosystem below the Earth that is twice the size of the world's oceans.
Wow.
The Earth is far more alive than previously thought, they say, according to deep life studies that reveal a rich ecosystem beneath our feet that is almost twice the size of all the world's oceans. Despite extreme heat, no light, minuscule nutrition, and intense pressure, scientists estimate this subterranean biosphere is teeming with between 15 and 23 billion tons of microorganisms, hundreds of times the combined weight of every human being on the planet. And the researchers are, I like this, the researchers are from the Deep Carbon Observatory. And they say the diversity of underworld species bears comparison to the Amazon or the Galapagos Islands. But unlike those places, the environment is still largely pristine because people have yet to probe most of the subsurface. And in fact, one organism found 2.5 kilometers below the surface has been buried for millions of years and may not rely at all on energy from the sun. Instead, the methanogen has found a way to create methane in this low-energy environment, which it may not use to reproduce or divide, but to replace or repair broken parts. All sorts of interesting bits to this.
Isn't it fascinating? And I always, I love to look at these emerging pieces of knowledge and just note how they correlate with what's happening in human society.
Yeah.
Like this sentence here. This sentence here could be a description of human life on planet Earth. despite extreme heat, no light, minuscule nutrition, and intense pressure.
Sounds like life on half of the earth, at least. Life in France. Yeah. Life in parts of Australia now, really.
I know. Isn't it amazing? But it's wonderful to read this kind of stuff where we're probing deeper, looking for what's beneath the surface and discovering life, amazing complexity.
Because, of course, the Gaia hypothesis, which was made famous by James Lovelock, who quoted that notion of Gaia.
That Gaia,
that lovely Gaia, James Lovelock, which has received a lot of criticism over the years, but as time has gone on and science has progressed, it seems like issues like this, of this living entity way below the surface of the Earth, would indicate that, of course, life on this planet is a life. It is a being of some sort or other.
A lot of consciousness.
A lot of damn consciousness
on this planet,
locked up in there. Yeah,
more than we know, actually. Yeah. And I think, didn't Lovelock sort of update his Gaia theory in a later book? I think you were saying this morning to really, describe an amazingly complex and adaptive system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, well, it's different. That's right. He formulated the original hypothesis and co-developed it with microbiologist Lynn Margulis in the 1970s. He named the idea, of course, after Gaia, the primordial goddess who personified the earth in Greek mythology. In 2006, the Geological Society of London awarded Lovelock the Wollaston Medal in part for his work on the Gaia hypothesis. So I guess it was taken into serious scientific consideration at that point.
Interesting.
It was initially criticised for being teleological and against the principles of natural selection, but later refinements aligned the Gaia hypothesis with ideas from fields such as Earth system science, biogeochemistry, and systems ecology. So looking at, I guess all of that is just indications of the growing focus on living systems theories of various types and approaches, complex adaptive systems theories.
Yeah, and certainly this is an emerging area of knowledge, is complex adaptive systems, and it's really, it starts to probe into the second tier of human values, human consciousness that Claire Graves described, where even the emerging paradigm, that's soon to be the dominant global paradigm, tends to operate on a fairly level playing field and doesn't sort of probe so deep as this scientific interpretation presents. But so that probing into the depth and looking at the complexity and the adaptive nature of the consciousness is really a second tier thing. So it's it's quite leading edge in terms of human thinking.
It leaves us in an interesting position, doesn't it? Because while we in the final stages, when we talk about the green stage 6 or layer 6 of Graves's work here, beyond 5, which has been dominant for the last several hundred years on the planet since the Industrial Revolution, roughly. In that stage, in stage 6, we like the idea of these sort of new systems science models, but we're still yet to really, I think, and it's kind of my paraphrasing what you're saying, yet to be able to grasp them in their true application and meaning in terms of second tier consciousness. There seems to be, I'm not articulating this very well, but you know what I'm saying, the sort of gap between what we kind of want to be true or want to take notice of and what we actually can and what actually is relevant and true and applicable to change.
Yeah, the layer 6, the emerging paradigm, is a more expansive perspective of the world, but it's slightly skewed towards the human experience and human values and human emotions and morality and those sorts of things. So it's not quite as holistic as the second tier value sets become. Yeah, but I think one of the interesting things about this article and this concept is that it's providing more scientific evidence, good, solid scientific evidence that we are living on a planet that is very, very much alive, in fact, more alive than we know, and consequently, has a level of consciousness and a capacity to adapt to its environment, which is, it adds a new layer to the whole climate change, anthropocentric influence argument that, this is not just a dumb rock that we're sitting on here and messing up. It's actually a living being that is adaptive.
Just a third rock from the sun. That's all we are, mate. Yeah, no, that's a very good point, and I think that this discovery of this massive organism below the surface of the Earth, this ecosystem in itself, something this size, which is larger than the biomass of all humanity on the planet, and thus bigger than I guess most, certainly all expressions of life that are singular. You think of the mycelium, the great network of mushrooms and the like, which is also a huge network. But having these gigantic networks and beginning to understand or see them surely must influence the fact that they too have an influence on the biota, if that's the right word, on the biomass of the biology of the whole planet, and thus of the weather systems and temperature and everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And that is acknowledged in a lot of the climate science. They talk about the methane emissions and that kind of thing.
Methane,
to some extent, anyway. But it's very, very interesting to see this kind of stuff emerging.
And meanwhile, particles have been flying out of Earth's poles, which I don't really quite understand this particular article, but apparently particles, cosmic rays, normally that bombard the Earth every day and are measured at observing sites around the world, with the most notable being located in the Earth's south pole. But actually, cosmic particles actually have been moving out of the Earth's poles. Do we know much about this? How can you?
This came from a news article. I found it on the Resonance Science Foundation website, and they've presented the original news article. I'm not sure if they've given a source for it. Actually, I think it was first published on space.com. It says. And mainstream science is, scratching its head about this because it doesn't fit with our model of the universe and where these rays should come from. They should come from inside our planet, according to mainstream science. But Haramain's crew have added a note here, and they're coming from a new scientific perspective, of course, a more advanced one than the mainstream. And they say when we see gravity as an emergent property due to the coherent spin dynamics of things like planets, pretty much everything has a spin, like even down to the small, quantum particles. Everything spins, and when something spins, of course, it has what they call centripetal force, which is an acceleration towards the center, and the build-up that happens of pressure in the center of an object with mass will inevitably cause jets to be extruded from the poles. And we see this particularly when we look at black holes out in space. They typically have sometimes quite visible jets shooting out of each pole of the black hole. Our Haramain's theory is that everything essentially has the nature of a black hole, in that if you go towards the center, you're going to find basically an interdimensional portal to infinity. You're going to disappear.
The closer you get to your own center, folks, the more likely you are to disappear.
That's right.
Into the black hole and come out who knows where.
Exactly. So we should expect really anything like a planet that it also has the spin, and it's going to have some kind of energy emitting from the poles, and this is what they're starting to find here. And as I said before, Haramain's is operating from a more advanced paradigm in terms of understanding physics, and mainstream science has a little bit of catching up to do there.
It's interesting. I love this Ice Cube Observatory. This is not an MC. Ice Cube Observatory last month made some supporting observations, which, upon further analysis, strongly suggest that those events, these emissions of cosmic rays from the poles, which upon further analysis strongly suggests that those events may be due to physics beyond the standard model.
Yes.
I love.
We love that supermodel, please.
The supermodel.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not talking about someone in a bikini.
We're all about the upgrade.
All about the upgrade. Talking about upgrades, we've got another message here about the sculpture. I just wish it was made with recycled or more sustainable materials. So inspired by Lismore's recycled Christmas trees over the last few years, this year's is made from second-hand umbrellas, reused screws and the like. Yeah, thanks, Anthea.
I mean, we could have some sort of community involvement here where you could bring in your recycled items and add them to the sculpture, perhaps.
Perhaps if we could stimulate cosmic rays being emitted from the top of the sculpture.
Well, I think it would look good with a TV antenna on the top.
A TV antenna.
One of those old-fashioned ones.
Or we could really get up the nose of lots of people here. We could do a 5G antenna. That would really piss people off. Even more so. I
think at least it should have some kind of laser light show added to it, at least. This is Byron Bay, after all.
Absolutely.
You're resonating right now on FutureSense with Steve McDonald
Hey, Nyck Jeanes. Yeah, you tune of FM on FutureSense here with Nick and Steve. Thanks for your texts. Spare us this maths rationalisation black hole bullshit of Harriman's and the Cretan Hawking study up on plasma cosmology. Thanks, Rob. Okay, and the Cretan Hawking, Stephen Hawking. I don't think we quoted Stephen Hawking today.
Goodness me.
Yeah, okay, and study up on plasma cosmology. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, we'll appreciate your input. Of course, we're not claiming that we know what's going on. We're just bringing our...
We have no idea, actually.
We have no idea. The more you know, the less you know, that's for sure. The further you get, the older you get, certainly the less you know. That's what I know for sure. But thanks for your for input. I like it. Yeah, a lot of people don't put much stock in Nassim Haramein. That's quite true, and others do. And I guess we will see as the future unfolds.
He's an interesting character, you know. As with most people, not everything that he presents, you know, is all that solid. I really do admire his insights into physics, and I think he's definitely progressed the world, our understanding of physics of this reality considerably. But he also does kind of fall into that pre-trans fallacy zone that Ken Wilber talks about as well, where there's a little bit of confusion about, you know, what's actually advanced and emerging compared to old thinking. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's probably something we need to explain a little bit to the listener who may not be aware of what pre-trans, meaning pre-trans rational in Claire W. Graves' model that we refer to a lot of the time.
I think it's a good time to do that, actually. Yeah. So if we look at the spectrum of human values and this process of developing through them or evolving, if we're talking about at species level and long-term, evolving through these value sets, values layers, they can be subdivided into zones. And so the first three layers in Claire Graves' model, which equate to, at a species level, the hunter-gatherer phase, the traditional tribal phase, and then the sort of egocentric martial warlike phase, they belong to what I call the pre-rational zone, because our ultimate compass for living life is our urges and our instincts and our emotions, what we feel in the moment. So behavior in that zone tends to be very much in the moment, very much reacting now to what we feel now and wanting to satisfy our needs straight away. And we see this, of course, at an individual level in our children as they're growing up. You know, they grow through these layers early on, and they just, if they're hungry, they want food now. They're not going to wait half an hour. You know, they just want it now. And then beyond that, and this equates to a transition that happens in the teen to early 20s range for individuals. As the frontal lobes complete their development, we move into the rational zone, where the rational mind dominates, and that, of course, is human nature as we know it for most people alive on the planet now. That the rational mind is dominant. You know, we can rationalize our fears away, we can rationalize our needs away, and you know, we start to see cause and effect. We see the logic, and previously there was no logic because it was all about what I want now, because I feel this, you know. But now we've got the brain kicking in, the rational mind, and we have logic, which makes us more capable, of course. Yeah, and allows us to deal with more complex issues.
Great amounts of success in solving problems up to that point with the logical mind.
Absolutely. It was the logical mind that took us to the moon and back. Yeah. However, that's not the end of the story. There's another zone beyond that rational zone where we're moving once again to something that's not rational, and it's called the trans-rational zone. And remembering too that these zones, just like the individual layers, they're like layers of skin on an onion. They're nested inside each other. They're not
like Russian dolls.
Exactly. Yeah. So this transition from the rational zone to the trans-rational zone, it is for the mainstream, you know, part of society. It's in the future. It hasn't happened yet, but of course there were people who were picked up in Claire Graves' research back in the 1950s who had already made this transition. A very small percentage, but they were there. And the trans-rational thinking gives rise to things like transpersonal psychology, quantum mechanics, those sorts of things. You know, things that have amazing complexity and depth, and which really haven't been embraced by mainstream society yet. When you look at even developmental psychology, it belongs in the transrational zone because it's looking at the layers. It's actually looking at these layers as stages of development. But these things haven't become mainstream yet. And, I'm always amazed when I talk to mainstream psychologists and I ask them about developmental psychology models, and they scratch their head and they say, oh, yeah, I think they mentioned something about that when I was at uni. But it's not something that most people use in their work. And the same applies to quantum mechanics. If you talk to the average scientist and ask them about, okay, how do you factor the observer effect into your work there, they'll scratch their head and say, oh, yeah, that'd be quantum mechanics, I guess. I'm sure they mentioned that at university, but these things just haven't come into the mainstream yet because they're beyond mainstream thinking. And so in the crossover from the rational zone to the transrational zone, we are moving to something that's not rational. And in between, in the crossover area there, as we're learning how to grow out of being dominated by the rational mind and start to tap into this transrational kind of quantum consciousness, as I call it, it's easy to confuse pre-rational ways of living with transrational ways of living. Of course, they're both not rational, right? And for somebody who's in the rational zone, like our caller who just texted in there, is obviously in the rational zone. When they look at transrational stuff, all they see is pre-rational because they don't know the difference between transrational and pre-rational. They can't figure it out.
And that's not a criticism; it's just the way it is.
It's just the way it is. It's like the difference between a tree and a rock. They do different things. They look different. You can't ask. You can ask a dog to kind of run up the road, but you can't ask a tree to run up the road. It's just because that's its nature in the moment.
Can't ask a rock to grow me a beautiful ripe papaya.
Exactly, it hasn't got that capacity. So we're talking here about not attributes which are good or bad or better or worse. We're just talking about the adaptive nature of human consciousness and how, when we're put in a set of life conditions that requires a certain level of adaptation, that's where we end up growing to. We grow to that level of adaptation, and we don't. Evolution is very efficient. You don't evolve something that's not useful. Although science sometimes thinks that we've evolved things that aren't useful, it's just simply because they don't understand their usefulness yet. So back to the explanation, when we're growing through this transition zone between the rational and the transrational, there's a time of learning where we have to learn how to tap into this direct knowing that comes from the transrational way of being human. And I liken it to quantum particles, how you can split a photon and have half of it here and half of it there, and one piece will know what the other particle is doing, whether it's spin changes or whatever. There's a direct knowledge.
Even billions of light years apart, theoretically.
Yeah, it's beyond time and space.
And it's beyond rational in that sense. Rational to us, as we now are.
It's, I guess you could call it a deep intuition, but it's it's a very sophisticated kind of intuition. But until you start to grow into that, because you haven't experienced it, you can't recognize it. And so when you see people speaking from this place of transrational knowledge, you check back through your filing system of everything you have known and experienced in your life, and the only place it fits is outside the rational zone, which, if you haven't grown into transrational, is pre-rational. So it gets equated with infantile thinking. Yeah.
So, I mean, examples of this, because it is quite difficult for most people to actually access what you're saying for the very reasons you're explaining, ironically. But if I'm having a particularly interesting day in somewhere, some sort of magic has occurred in my day, and I step outside under the starry skies, and suddenly I look up and I see a shooting star go across, and I go, see, and that's meaning to me. That means something to do with how I've experienced my life today. It's a good sign. It's an omen. I mean, is that pre-rational or transrational?
Well, it can be either. You can't. This is the tricky thing about human consciousness. You can't point to something outside of human consciousness and say, "Is that this or that?" Because it's how we interpret it, right? And we need to look at these zones or the layers of consciousness as windows that we look through. Okay, and by looking through each different window, we get a different perspective on reality, and that allows us to make sense of it in different ways. Yeah, so it's tricky. It's very tricky, and it's literally something that you can't fully know unless you directly experience it. Yeah. So it doesn't matter how much I use my rational mind and talk and try and use words to describe what it is, you're never going to get it unless you actually experience it yourself.
That's right.
And that's what's one of the difficult things about talking about it.
And of course, there are points in our experience where I guess we get a feeling or a taste of this, and this is what underneath things like synchronicity.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that might be useful. I mean, even if you're living in the rational zone, you can have what they call a peak experience of trans-rational being, and some people may recognise that from getting into what they call a flow state. Right, which can happen
in the zone,
as they say. Most commonly discussed in sport, professional sport, I guess.
Yes.
That time where your mind stopped thinking about what you were doing and your body was just doing it, and your body was doing it perfectly and in sync with the timing, and everything was perfect. And after it happened, you said to yourself, "I don't know how I did that, but I just did it." I wasn't thinking about it. And that's an example of moving into this sophisticated sort of trans-rational way of being, where you're tapping into a higher rhythm, a higher flow.
And that's where I guess synchronicity, as Jung put it, because it's that moment where you touch some greater unconscious or subconscious point which may be connected to other people, to other situations, and recognise it as meaningful in some way rather than just a coincidence. Is that another way you could argue it? I mean, again, it's tricky. It's very subjective.
Again, it's not really about the attribution of meaning.
Right, it's not about the attribution of meaning.
We're talking about a pure state of being.
And I guess that's what I was. Because the state of putting a meaning on it is sort of a sense of regression back to an earlier stage. In a sense,
it's not a regression. It's I guess what I'm trying to say is here that to tap into where this comes from, you've got to go deep down into our unconscious, and there are frameworks down there that we're not really aware of.
There are frameworks down there,
which actually help us organise our understanding of reality. And those frameworks shift when we go through a major transition of values, and then what bubbles up to the surface are things like our way of making meaning, our way of attributing meaning to things, and that will be different with every layer of consciousness. The way that we attribute meaning changes also. So that still happens, and it happens in a different way at each layer as we grow through or adapt through these different layers, or even as we regress back. Sometimes our life conditions call us to regress back. But years ago when I was living in Melbourne, I got invited to sit on an extreme performance discussion committee at the Victorian Institute of Sport by virtue of my work experience in the military and as a rescue helicopter pilot, because I was working in extreme circumstances.
Yes.
And I can remember one day talking, being asked about my experience and talking to these sort of senior sports coaches about flying the rescue helicopter and hovering while a winching operation was going on with a gusty wind blowing, and noticing, I just noticed one time that my hand was moving to balance the wind blowing against the helicopter, but I wasn't thinking about it. Like, I wasn't becoming aware of the wind and then moving my hand. It was just happening, and it was happening at the instant that a wind gust would hit the helicopter, my hand would move. And that was a time when I was tapped into a deeper flow state, and that information was coming from somewhere else. It wasn't coming through my rational mind. So it's that kind of thing that we can, even if we haven't grown into the trans-rational layers of consciousness, we can still have peak experiences of this when we're in other places. It's
very interesting that this idea of being in the zone applies so much to sport. It's almost like sport is a place where you can practice that, in a sense, by having the skill level where skill just you let go of the skill, and you're in that moment, in that zone, and just experiencing that.
That's right. And any kind of discipline that teaches mastery, will tell you that you start out from a formless place where you don't know anything, and then you grow into, or you are educated into a place of structure where you get given a structure to follow, which by virtue of being structured has to have an element of rigidity to it. But then once you reach a point of mastery, you actually go beyond the form to the formless once more, but it's like a conscious formlessness rather than an unconscious.
Yes, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. If you've got all that, folks, you're a better man than me. No, I got it. I think I got it. I don't know if I got it. Doesn't matter. I'll get it.
Don't think about it.
Thank you. I'll do that.
You're tuned to FutureSense with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up.
Yes, you are. Last few minutes, 10:45 here on BFM. Pregnancy, birth and beyond coming up next. A couple of texts here. Yes, this is an interesting example of the pre-rational, transrational, I guess, or is it? I had the same experience when learning to touch type using a typing game. It was like magic, seeing my response occurring before I consciously recognised what I had to type.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's happening there is you're bypassing the rational mind.
Yeah, thanks, Dudley. Very good. The Integrity Commission has been announced by the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Many people, senior lawyers, fiercely criticising it as having no teeth and being a disaster, and some, I think, on the Labor side basically saying it's worse than having no commission at all. And is it trying to protect the current government itself by its lack of teeth?
Surely not, Nick.
What do we think about this in terms of values and in terms of evolution?
Yeah, well, we've got this values gap, you see. We've got an old system to start with, an old political system that was designed before the internet existed, from this modern scientific industrial mindset. In fact, it even almost stretches back to the old agricultural paradigm, the early stages of our parliamentary origins, I think. And we're living in a world where that kind of thinking just cannot manage the complexity anymore. And in fact, as the world is becoming more complex, what we're finding is that our decision-making processes and our thinking that used to work really, really well, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, actually not only doesn't work well, but it creates more problems than it solves. And
that's the key, really, isn't it?
It is the key, and this is the building of evolutionary tension. And we sooner or later we reach a trigger point, or a tipping point, where we realise that what we're doing isn't working, and we go through this transformation of having to grow into something more complex and more capable. And so what we're seeing here is Morrison operating in a very mainstream old paradigm way, and according to the old modern paradigm, information was power, and so information was controlled very carefully. And typically in an organisation you would have a curtain that hung in front of the organisation, and the public would see your curtain, which was your public image, and that's what they would understand about your organisation. And behind the curtain you would have the Wizard of Oz doing what he does. And what's happened is the internet has basically stripped away that curtain, and we see into the back end now. So the wizard's still there, like turning the handles and blowing the smoke out,
thinking that he's not being seen.
Thinking he's not being seen, but of course we can all see exactly what he's doing, and we all, he's just ignorant to the fact that people can see through what he's doing. So here he's just going through a massive process of arse covering for, the existing government. I mean, they're just in a massive self-protection mode at the moment, and all the decisions that they're making are all about basically their internal party politics. They're not only worried about the general public re-electing them, they're worried about coherence and harmony within their party, which they don't have. And so all of their attention is getting directed there, and all of these national issues which have implications globally sometimes, like that decision on the encryption bill the other day, which has a global impact, not just an Australian impact, are being given to us by this crowd who are basically looking at their belly buttons, wondering about how they're going to survive the next election, and not even thinking. It's not, they don't have the capacity at the moment, because most of their capacity is taken up by their own self-interest, to understand the wider implications of their decision-making process. But in this case, they're clearly engineering this Integrity Commission to make sure that it can have absolutely minimal effect on the way that they do business.
Yes. Well, of course, they were drawn kicking and screaming to the Banking Royal Commission, which was, while clearly revealed much and was pretty successful. We'll see what the recommendations coming down in February are about.
It was horrifying, actually.
It was horrifying, but it was still quite short. 69 days, I think, altogether. I think only a handful of cases out of 10,000 personal cases were heard. Yeah. And it would seem that, again, with this, even more so with this, that this Integrity Commission has been set up to minimise the ability of it to actually go deep into the issues. Yeah. And I note that the former Commissioner of the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption, the ICAC, David Ip, said that I think what's been created is the kind of Integrity Commission you'd want to have when you didn't want to have one.
Yeah.
pretty much. Now, Morrison and co have sort of slammed that and said, well, the ICAC was like a kangaroo court, a lesson in what not to do. But that would seem very strange, especially considering how many New South Wales Labor members were done over by the ICAC, and justifiably so. Yeah. But they're clearly afraid of something, I think, the coalition. And
going to jail, I think.
Oh, yes, jail time. Could be that.
Like those New South Wales politicians.
Oh, dear. I mean, in terms of this kind of integrity in the public space, in public sphere, there ain't much probably, and most people now know this. I think I've referred this to you before. I've said to you there's a new Russell Brand movie on Netflix called Russell Brand Rebirth. There's a point in it where he says, oh yes, talking about the British elections, wouldn't it be great if things were different, namely that when a new Prime Minister is elected or a Prime Minister is re-elected and comes out the front of Downing Street and says, well, we're going to look after all of you, all the people, we're going to do all the right things, that all this rubbish that we all know it's rubbish. Everybody listens and goes, yeah. And instead of the refreshing approach where a new leader comes out and says, actually, we're going to continue doing what we're doing, we're going to continue ripping you off, bullshitting to you, lying behind your back, manipulating, taking if not bribes, certainly money to help our friends in various policies.
The thing, it's easy to get cynical and
I don't want to be cynical.
Just criticise, and we do it sometimes because it's a bit of fun, I guess.
It's a bit of fun.
But these things only look bad once you actually, pop out of the paradigm and you're looking back at it from a different set of values. And when you're inside the paradigm, it's kind of like being in a poker game. If you're a poker player and that's what you do, then you don't feel bad about hiding your cards from other people, and you don't feel bad about bluffing someone else to the point where they lose the game and you win.
Part of the skill. It's your brilliance.
It's part of the game.
You're cool if you can do that.
Exactly. And we're living in a world where that game just doesn't work anymore because of the transparency that we have from our social media technology. Yes. And so, yes, I think it's time for a public announcement.
Yeah, public announcement. Here it comes.
Your attacks upon us will not go unpunished. You are in contravention of the new paradigm.
You're in contravention of the new paradigm. It's a bit Brave New World, that. A bit Aldous Huxley in 84. Quite unsettling. That's about it for us.
Adds to the evolutionary tension.
It does. We're going to go. Thanks for joining us here.
It's been fun.
On FutureSense. We'll be back next Monday morning, 9 to 11, from myself, Nyck Jeanes, and
from me, Steve McDonald.
It's Steve over there. Yes, it is. Yeah, I love it. Bye-bye. Thanks for Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond. Up next.
You've been listening to FutureSense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. FutureSense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.